The installation of the vertical hydraulic saw is not a difficult task. Thorough planning for its location will ease the job. Items to consider include electrical routing and loading and unloading of materials. The location of the saw should allow sufficient room for easy handling of long pieces of material and have the datum line, the line where the customer wants the material to flow to the bar feed, then to the saw, lined up. The saw will arrive with a sheet of plastic over it wrapped in plastic wrap. The saw's bar feed will arrive as a separate piece wrapped in plastic as well. In most cases, the saw will be the first piece that will need to be placed. The saw can be moved with a forklift by placing one fork under the coolant tank and one under the side of the saw. Make sure to not catch any cords or hoses when placing the forks under the saw. The saw can be moved using a forklift, sliding the forks into the slots inside the two large gray shipping brackets on the saw. However, not all forklift forks will fit. The saw can also be moved using a crane, lifting the saw with the two large gray shipping brackets that go through the saw. Make sure to attach the crane straps around the whole shipping bracket instead of attaching the straps through any of the four lift handles on each bracket. Remove the plastic wrap and plastic sheet from the saw and bar feed. Be careful to not cut any wires, hoses, or hit the console when unwrapping if you're using a razor or knife to cut away the plastic. After they are unwrapped, inspect the saw and bar feed for any damage that may have occurred in shipping. Touch-up paint is provided for any minor scratches. Inside the coolant pan will be the saw's accessories and spare parts kit. These consist of a checklist sheet, customer's copy of the saw schematics, extra fuses, coolant pump, bag of bolts and nuts, touch-up paint, zip ties, and a bag containing the lockout keys for the console. Remove the shipping brackets that lock the saw arm and console in place and secures the saw for shipping. The shipping brackets consist of four large red-tipped bolts that lift the carriage off the bearings, two large gray brackets that go through the saw, two red brackets on the side of the saw, two red brackets that attach the counterweight to the saw base, and a bracket that attaches the console to the saw. Keep the shipping brackets and bolts in a safe place in case the saw ever needs to be moved to another location. The saw base uses 4 foot pads to support the machine, which comes shipped mounted on the saw base. All leveling is done by adjusting the 4 foot pads. The saw should be carefully leveled using a precision level which is placed on the saw vise way cutting block to level the saw. The saw should be leveled side to side and front to back to ensure accurate cutting. Leveling is accomplished by adjusting the jacking screws on each corner of the saw base. The remaining screws and jam nuts are used to lock the foot pads in place. Place the saw's bar feed next to where the bar feed will attach to the saw. If using a forklift to do this, make sure the forks are coming out the other side from underneath so that the bar feed does not tip over. Move the bar feed up to the saw until the notches at the end of the bar feed are able to be placed into the saddles of the saw. This is done for alignment purposes only, as the feed table will move up and down when it feeds. Use the jacking bolts on the bar feed's 2 foot pads closest to the saw to raise the bottom half of the bar feed until there is no visible gap between the bottom and the top of the bar feed. There is a sight hole located in the center of the saddles on each side of the saw where the bar feed's 2 notches connect. Adjust the height of the bar feed at the end closest to the saw until the sight hole can be seen all the way through. Using a precision level that is placed on the bar feed's feed vise shuttle way to check the feed table level side to side and front to rear, the bar feed should be leveled by adjusting the jacking bolts on the 4 foot pads attached to the base. Hold the level on the rear roller to check the side-to-side level at the rear of the table. Adjust the jacking bolts until it is level. Lock the foot pads in place after the bar feed is level. A small box on the side of the bar feed, the FIC box, protects a terminal strip along the side of the bar feed. The wires that will need to be connected from the saw to the bar feed are in the long flex hose that is attached to an elbow that will be wrapped in plastic and sealed with tape. Remove the tape and plastic. Open the cover on the FIC box and place the round nut that will be in the box into the hole at the bottom of the box. Pull the wires from the elbow up through the hole and nut in the bottom of the box. Be careful to not pull off any of the numbers that are attached to each wire. These numbers will be matched up to the numbers on the terminal when wiring. Screw the bolt tight to hole at the bottom of the box. Some wires will be labeled as spares. The spares will only be used later if additional options are ordered for the saw, so separate them from the numbered wires. After the wires are separated, the spare wires can be coiled and zip-tied, then moved out of the way. Each numbered wire has a numbered spot on the terminal that it will need to be connected to. Remove the tape at the end of each wire and connect it to its spot on the terminal. Replace the FIC cover. The hydraulic hoses coming from the saw will need to be hooked up to the manifold on the side of the bar feed. The blocks on the manifold should be labeled to match the hoses that are each labeled. There are 5 hoses that are labeled and will need to be connected on the standard hydraulic vertical bar feed. The 2 hoses labeled P and T, pressure and tank hoses, a hose labeled L, lift-up table, a hose labeled HF, hydroforce, and a hose labeled the number 1, the motor. Only a certified electrician should connect the saw to the main electrical source. 3-phase power is connected to the Hemsaw by connecting the 3 leads to the screws on the top of the disconnect box. Check the hydraulic gauge found inside the upper right of the left side of the panel boxes located on the back of the saw. If the gauge's pressure does not rise, staying at 0, the 2 phases will need to be switched in the wiring. Unlike an air saw installation, checking for proper blade rotation by running the saw motor and noting the direction of the blade move cannot be used to tell if a hydraulic saw is wired right, because the blade direction stays correct regardless of which way the saw is wired. Be sure that plant supply voltage matches that of the machine. If the supply voltage and that of the machine do not match, the saw must be rewired in order to prevent damage to the motor, transformer, or other electrical components. The saw is shipped set up for 440 volts unless otherwise noted. If any changes are required, they should be made by a competent, certified electrician. A second set of the saw's wiring schematics is kept inside the panel boxes located on the back of the saw. The set of prints is referred to as the service tech's copy and will need to remain in the control panel box. Also, inside the upper right panel of the panel box is where 2 reset buttons are found. If the saw does not power up when turned on from the console, or the panel appears to have power but the motor won't start, try hitting the reset button on the bottom right several times, and then try powering up the saw again. Use the same process with the reset button on left for the hydraulic motor if it does not power up. Be sure that the on-off valve is closed on the coolant washdown hose before setting up the coolant pump. Otherwise, unwanted coolant will flow out of the washdown hose nozzle when the pump is started. Press the coolant pump filter onto the inlet area of the coolant pump and attach the coolant hose that is coming out from the bottom of the saw to the coolant pump by press-fitting it onto the pump outlet tube. Set the coolant pump into the sectioned-off area near the back corner of the base. Then bring the power cord up through the slot in the coolant tank cover and plug the cord into the outlet on the saw. Add water and cutting fluid to the product's recommended mixture ratio. If the saw has a chip conveyor, slide the 2 chip containers underneath the sides of the saw where the chips and debris come out of the chip conveyor. Side wings are placed on the sides of the saw to return the coolant to the coolant pump and to work as splash guards. Each side has 2 wings or plates and 2 braces that will need to be installed. To install, align the holes in the braces to the marked holes that are on the ledges on the side of the saw base pan. One hole will be on the ledge of the pan near the front of the saw, and the other is located on the pan ledge near the middle of the saw. Then screw the bolt through the bottom of the ledge and through the brace. After the braces are in place, the plate without the lip will be placed on the front end of the saw over the braces with the screws going through the pre-drilled holes on the plate. Place the nuts over the screws and then tightly bolt the plate to the braces and ledge of the saw. The other plate that has the lip will be hung on the back end of the saw over the ledge, with the lip on one side of the plate hung over the other plate. This plate will not be bolted down, allowing it to easily be removed if needed for maintenance. Repeat this process to install the wings for the other side of the saw. The saw